Right. Well, hello everyone. I think we will make a start now. So thank you everyone for joining us today for what is our very first virtual research lounge. The research lounge is hosted by Research and Innovation, Nottingham University Hospitals NHS Trust. And it is the first in a series, so we're going to be holding these every month, with the aim of having open conversations with patients, the public, researchers and clinicians about areas of interest, about research, the latest research, topics and themes that you find important. So with that in mind, today we're going to be discussing COVID-19 research looking into the risks to BAME communities, and this is in support of Black History Month. So our speaker today is Dr. Guru Prasad Afal, who is the Deputy Director of the NIHR, the National Institute for Health Research, Nottingham Biomedical Research Centre. I nearly forgot who we work for then. I'll just run you through a few practicalities of how it all works. So firstly, in a moment, I'll hand over to Guru. He will then go through a presentation he's kindly prepared for us, sharing his insights over the last, plus 6 months now. Once we've done that, we'll then go to a Q&A session. For those of you who may not be familiar with Zoom and Zoom webinar, which is what this is, there is a panel at the bottom of your screen. So if you move your mouse at the bottom of the screen, there is a Q&A option. So if you click on that, a separate window will open. And this is an opportunity for you, as we're going through the session, if you have any questions or anything that springs to mind, then please do pop it in the Q&A. And once that's finished, then we'll make our way through that in a Q&A session at the end. We also have a chat function as well. And I can see there's been some in there already. So if you have any questions, queries, anything else, then do pop them in there as well. So yes, with that in mind, and thank you again for joining us all this afternoon, I will pass over to Professor Afal, if that's okay.
I'll switch on my share screen mode and then tell me when you can see it properly.
Lovely.
It should be full screen version of what I was going to talk about, which is ethnicity and COVID-19. Are you seeing it full screen now? Or are you seeing two screens?
I don't think we're seeing anything at the moment. Have you got two screens up, Guru?
Yes, yes.
If you could, you drag it onto the other one, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Let me see. I think what I needed to do was full screen version of it. That's why it didn't show up. How about that now?
I'm still not seeing anything.
Display settings. What about now?
Still nothing over here.
Huh. Go back.
It's, you know, on the, have you got it?
Well, can you see my screen at all? I've said share screen.
So if you click on share screen at the bottom, you should get like a list of the applications you can share. And if you click on the PowerPoint one, then that should share it.
I now know what it is.
Hey, we've got it. Brilliant.
What about now?
Yeah, I can see it. If you just do present mode, yeah, we've got it.
Is it full screen version? Yeah.
It's full screen with the slide at the side.
Oh, then we need to swap the screen then. How about that?
That's it. We got it. Perfect.
Excellent. So I'll be talking about ethnicity and COVID-19. Some of you might have attended my first PPI meeting at the beginning of the pandemic, or at least at the beginning of the pandemic, mostly in Nottingham. So I'll be talking about some of the concepts that have evolved from there and a bit more understanding of how ethnicity relate to COVID-19. I'll also present something we have done since then, which is directly relevant to some of you might have contributed to our healthcare volunteer studies. And I'll present you findings and then ask you as to what it means to us and what you suggest we do, as well as say, well, how we can contribute to research overall, especially with COVID-19, but beyond. So what is it? How do you understand the terminologies? And these are not really strictly defined, and there isn't a universally defined term. So if you say race, it's understood by most as a mixture of physical, behavioral, and cultural attributes. If you talk about ethnicity, it belongs to a social group with common national and cultural traditions. So there is an element of geography, and but you can't run away from the fact that there is an implications of shared ancestry, shared heritage, and some shared geography behind both these terms. And often it is really used one instead of other. And I would like to say that my talk would always mainly refer to ethnicity because that is my languages, not because that is how strictly it's defined. So questions, it came up at the beginning of this pandemic. What we saw was certainly a clear-cut influence of ethnicity on the outcome as well as susceptibility to COVID-19. So the question to me was that, is it all socioeconomic factors or are there biological factors? Because I am not a database scientist, less public health scientist, but interested in these factors. But I'm a scientist with background in biology and molecular biology. So I would like to ask questions which I can answer with my expertise, at the same time not ignoring the other factors which will influence it. Then you will get somewhere close to the truth. So do the comorbidities, we were also obvious. There were a number of comorbidities which were influencing. And are these comorbidities actually influenced by genetic factors? Because comorbidity can occur in any population, but it might be there is something innate to certain ethnic groups. And can ancestry influence innate immune response? Because innate immune response is important in how we respond to this infection. And are there common genetic factors really which influence biological pathways? And is it unique to COVID-19? And we all ask these questions in Panther, and we have got an answer to a couple of those. So just to
Guru, sorry, 1 second. I've had a few comments saying that people can't see the whole of your slides.
Oh.
That they're some part of them have been cut off. Yeah, they're only seeing half of them. Maybe we could do it to how you had it originally, where it was a bit smaller.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Zoomed in at all? Are you zoomed in at all on the? Oh, that's better. Yeah, you got it.
Is that better now?
That's better.
Oh, I didn't do much.
Sorted. Perfect. Thank you, Guru.
Okay.
Yeah.
I could see it just like I do. Probably some screens, some formatting of the screens. Can everybody hear? Everybody says yes?
Yeah, I've got a comment back now saying
excellent,
that's wonderful.
Excellent.
Thank
so
you.
Now you start seeing the data. So first of all, I have produced some of the core data sets. So NHS England hospital death data, this is probably early on during the pandemic. I'm not really necessarily picking up the best data from yesterday, only because I will take you through the thought process and then support the evidence for it. So whole picture is really not altered by the numbers which I mentioned. First thing we discovered is that 1.5 times higher death in Indians, 2.8 times death in Pakistanis, 3 times death in Bangladeshis, 4.3 times death and excess death in Black Africans, 2.5 times Black Afro-Caribbeans, 7.3 times if it is named as Black Other, and 1.6 times any mixed. So hard fact is that if you compare to Caucasians, almost all ethnicity had more access risks, times fold. If you look at the diagram on the right-hand side, obvious explanation could be related to geography. When you mean geography, I mainly mean probably where they are based within the UK, and you can argue that areas will have some environmental factors which might really make them predisposed. And demography means that the comorbidity factors, just for a simplification. Geography and demography is putting them together. And then the dark green is got actual hospital deaths. So if you look at white British, I've just said, if you take it as a standard, we have kept everything standardized to white British population. You can see Bangladeshis have got excess deaths, and this is explained by geography. So you could say that crowding, or I'm just giving an example or explanation of what I mean by geography, or the density, population density might be influencing it. That is the highest bar there. If you say the same way, Black Africans, similar, geography seem to explain excess death quite a bit, but you can also see green, which is coming up beyond the one line. One line is the standard line. Anything going beyond that is really something different to that group. So they have got really risk factors, excess deaths, which are not explained by geography, demography, or combination of those. If you look at Black Caribbeans, virtually geography is in excess, and if you combine it with demography, there is still an excess death, but most of the excess deaths are unexplained by these things. If you look at Indians, area, and some of it is unexplained. So on and so on. So the point I would like to highlight is that still, if you give a standard explanation saying, well, this is where they are living, it's an environmental factor, or it's a comorbidity, there is still excess deaths which are unexplained by these standard explanations. So moving on, then we came to this, which I saw very early on, almost like March. At the beginning of it, already London had this, and you could see that. This is a comparison of people already in ITU, so you can almost like say they have got some significant severe problems, and generally these kind of selection almost like chooses people are equal on other ways in terms of disease severity. And then right hand side is the comparison of viral pneumonia, which is unrelated to COVID-19, to viral pneumonia related to COVID-19 on the left hand column. And I have highlighted the key data in yellow. So if you look at it, ethnicity is a risk factor for serious outcome only related to COVID-19, even when you compare to other viral pneumonias. So it tells you that maybe something directly related to COVID-19, which we'll come to as well. And this is the most dire of the dire data on the left-hand side table, which has appeared now, which shows people who are healthcare workers who died. This is again not a complete data set, but makes the point nevertheless. There are about 100 plus people. And look at the key factors. Key factors are gender, substantial excess risk in males, which is well described. Age is another risk factor, but this is not really high in this age group. So you can't, in this group, you can't say this is all due to age. You can see the median age in nurses and midwives is 51, healthcare support 54, doctors and dentists a little bit higher, 62, and other stuff 51. So this is not really due to age. These are all in an age group where they should not have such a severe outcome because of the age. Gender, yes. Gender is a risk factor. So you can say that probably in doctors and dentists, 94% of them who died were men. So this is then is BAME risk factor, Black and Asian ethnic minority groups. 71% were ethnic minorities in nurses and midwives, 56% in health support workers, 94% in doctors and dentists, and other staff it wasn't. And then there is a bottom line just to show that, is it just because these groups are working more in these areas? Well, it is disproportionately higher. So if you compare the bottom denominator and then the next row in front of it, so 20% of nurses and midwives are from the ethnic minority, while 70% of people who died were. So it can't be explained by these people working too much in that area. And the doctors, 44% are ethnic minorities, 94% death rate. So it is not really explained just by working. The reason this table is important is that two tables. In one, I've shown you that it's actually not any pneumonias. So if you think of any pneumonias, that might be influenced by environment, population density, and that is not explaining COVID-19. So you need to say, well, there is something beyond just the environment. And then socioeconomic factor often really highlighted, well, doctors and dentists or any other groups here, well, some homogeneity in their socioeconomic status. And this is going beyond that. That is the point I want to make. And this is the biggest data set we have got, about 17 million, more than 18 years old, involved in a year. So the way to look at this is the center line, 1, and anything completely on the right-hand side without the overlap on the line is significant. And I just want to really explain that this is what is called a multivariate analysis, where people adjust for other risk factors, which means that when this line, these dots and the lines on either side go right side of this, that is adjusted for other factors in the table there, except for ethnicity. So if you look at it, ethnicity is a clear-cut risk factor. And obesity is a risk factor. Diabetes is a risk factor, which made me think, well, is ethnic groups are involved because of the way they have got higher risk of obesity or higher risk of diabetes. The reason is that here, I had already, now it's published in a journal, data from China, where we had about 48,000 control group and 578 patients with COVID-19, which had significant COVID-19. I took away some who didn't have too much symptoms, and just look at the body mass index. 25 is normal. Here the control group have 22, and COVID-19 patients have got BMI of 24. And if you look below here, severe COVID-19, their BMI is 25.38. So this is hardly overweight, not hardly. By definition, if you take Caucasian standard, this is not even overweight. And why is it important? It's because in Asian subgroup, as well as Africa-Caribbean groups, there are two big bodies, one WHO, another one NICE had accepted now that lower body mass index is associated with significant metabolic consequences, so much so that 27 BMI equates to obesity in ethnic minorities. So this group of people get obesity-related consequences at much lower body mass index or much lower deposition of fat. And that may be explained by their genetic susceptibility. So this is investigating just an Asian genome. So I'll just simplify it and say, well, you know, by number of studies, a gene or pool of genes influence someone's body mass index. And then you know what variations influence body mass index. And then you compare, let's say, Caucasian, thousands and thousands of people, and then say, well, what proportion have got these kind of genetic susceptibility factors, and then compare it to the Asians. you've got substantially excess enrichment of such genetic variations for type 2 diabetes, which I have marked, as well as obesity in Asian genomes. So innately, these groups have got some factors of susceptibility which makes them predisposed to it. This is not one gene or anything. This is number of factors which are all genetic, which are, I would say, enriched in this kind of communities. One of the factors which, out of interest from the liver disease, I investigated is to how the brown fat is working. Brown fat is initially thought to be just in kids. It's on the supraclavicular areas and between our scapula at the back, and it generates energy. It's a way of body responding to cold temperature. So you can put your hand in the cold temperature and then do a cine video, and then this orange on either side of the neck lights up, and you can see, well, how much it lights up using a specific recording and measure it accurately. And I did some studies in Indians in India and Indians in Leicester, and then showed that these ethnic groups do not generate same amount of heat compared to Caucasians, taking everything else as equal, which to some degree explains why there is some innate ability to accumulate fat earlier and be susceptible to its consequences much, much earlier at a lower body mass index. Even going back to how did we acquire all this, this is a story from evolution about 35,000 years ago, when the African Homo sapiens goes into Europe, was exposed to cold and developed some polymorphism, genetic variations, which gave them an advantage of surviving in such temperature, which might be just have a trigger, which is a cold receptor stimulating brown fat function, let's say that. And that frequency, if you look at around the population, seem to define people's ability to generate heat from the brown fat. And it's very, very low in Africa because it was hot. And also that is where the Homo sapiens came from. And then when they came to Europe, all this colored area is the proportion who have this polymorphism, which helps them to survive in the cold, which went up. And then when they evolved and came into Asia, it all went down again. So this is just to kind of give an example or anecdote of how a community may be more or less susceptible from the evolutionary point of view. Coming to directly to COVID-19, we know COVID-19 enters the lung epithelial cells. This is a picture through a receptor called ACE2. And ACE2 is gets inactivated once the virus comes in. But ACE2, if it is really working well, it breaks down some of the pro-inflammatory signals into anti-inflammatory signals. But because it's inactivated, now there is balance is tilted towards pro-inflammation, and they get much worse lung injury as a result of that. And there is really precedence for it. So genetic polymorphism in this one of the genes, for example, is much more prevalent among Asians. And there is also in other kinds of pneumonia, some variation in susceptibility or protection from it in ethnic groups. So this is just, again, another example of saying, well, how it can really affect one's susceptibility. Not to go through the details of what the genetic polymorphism is. Similarly, I would like to talk about Afro-Caribbean ethnicity. So when I showed you how the virus enters the cell and then body responds to it. And one of the body's response is by generating anti-inflammatory chemokines or chemicals at the bottom of this picture called interferons, for example. And if you look at the genome, which I showed you for Asian, similar way, African groups compared to European ancestry, there is one kind of gene and its product, a protein called toll-like receptor 7. It is important in sensing the viral nucleic acid. So exposure of Afro-Caribbean population to viruses was much lower, so their innate immune response to those might be altered, and this TLR7 seemed to be very important in this particular kind of pneumonia. So argument is that maybe these are the ways how the ethnic groups are biologically more susceptible and more susceptible to more severe conditions. So in summary, at least going by the scientific logic, there is some genetic factors which are associated with variations in the prevalence of chronic conditions in people with different ethnic background. This is what I mean by why type 2 diabetes is more common in Asians, why obesity is more has more consequences, even at a lower amount of fat deposition in certain ethnic groups. In the same way, why the response to certain infections where specific factors need to be generated by the body are different to ethnic groups. And in a large scale studies, we need to really explore this and identify these factors so that we can understand how we can really improve our response to or prepare people for it. So just coming to what we have done so far, this is thanks to some of you or many of you or all of you who have contributed to healthcare workers cohort in Nottingham University Hospital. So we recruited 634 participants, 78% were women and 22% were men. The just starting point is that men seem to be more susceptible. We should have got more men there, but there we go. And thanks to whoever has participated. You can see that 23% reported symptoms and 2.5% had positive tests for COVID-19. And because the numbers were modest, we have similar cohort, but not quite serial sampling like we are doing, was being done in UCL. We included 731 healthcare workers from London hospital groups. And this is kind of a preliminary result. You're the first ones to see it beyond the investigators. Which shows that we have followed up antibodies and healthcare workers. 18% in Nottingham and 22% in London have got antibodies against SARS-CoV-2, which means that the body or individuals have responded to virus. So in theory, they have high chance of having been infected by it and have developed these antibodies to it. And over a period of time, it goes down in levels. That is just a scientific fact. And a few conclusions. We can say that people who are working in ITU have half the chance of having antibodies compared to people working in other roles, which is probably to say that they are more protected, and which means that protection, which we are designing, does work. And probably in areas like ITU, it is highly unlikely that people will ever be even present in an environment without a PPE, means that their risk is lower than anybody else working elsewhere. You would have thought risk is higher in ITU. Of course, exposure is higher in ITU, but everybody saw that early. So PPEs are in place. And so overall, their infection rate is much lower than elsewhere. However, PPE use as a part of the hospital role, if outside ITU, is not associated with having a lower risk of antibodies. So the presence or absence of antibody in hospital does not seem to be explained by use or not of PPE, which tells you that there are other factors which are influencing, including acquiring infection elsewhere. So BAME healthcare workers, are they more likely to develop antibodies? Answer is Black healthcare workers are the only group in our cohort who are at excess risk of acquiring antibodies, but they were all in the asymptomatic group. So excess risk was 3.1, which means that, threefold likely to have antibodies. but they are mainly in asymptomatic group. Below the last line says symptomatic infection wasn't significant statistically in any ethnic group otherwise. So what's the interpretation? Most of the exposure of virus comes from the hospital. This suggests that Black and healthcare workers are more likely to have asymptomatic infection. It may be probably beyond, I would say, the socioeconomic and exposure factors within the limits of how much we have investigated. I can tell you caveats if you have questions on that. If that is true, how could we really reduce it? I mean, it's possible that we can frequently test Afro-Caribbean ancestry healthcare workers so that we pick them up early, much more often. It also suggests that risk factors among Asians and other ethnic minority group is not quite related to hospital role, but may be related to other risk factors. There is a big caveat to that, which I can explain later on. And the question to you is that, what would you investigate in these circumstances? What kind of interventions you think might be acceptable? Do you think it should be regular testing for this group, or what else you think we should be vigilant for early symptoms on this group, or what? Finally, I end up with this slide. This is Deva Jamani. She is a queen in Mysore, a state in south of India, Karnataka state in South India. She is showing modeling, actually. I've just said, well, queen, the model, and the volunteer. So she was the first person to be given smallpox vaccine in 1805, I think. So she had injected and then she developed a pustule. She didn't want to show that, so she wore her blouse and then exposed her blouse wearing arm to demonstrate that she had been vaccinated. So it was almost like an example of ethnic minorities who are susceptible being able to contribute to research by participating in it. And I think that is where I'll stop.
Wow. Okay, thank you, Guru. That's absolutely fascinating. And I feel quite privileged that we were the first ones to see some of that data. But it's, yeah, absolutely fascinating. So I'll go now. We'll start the question and answer session. If you have any questions, yeah, please pop them in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to answer those for you. So the first question we've had is that, knowing this information, those more at risk, I'd like to think those more at risk would now be in the vulnerable group and asked to isolate. What do you think of that, Professor?
Yeah, so isolation is a double-edged sword. You know, I, as a president of Basel, has been involved in you talking about like extremely vulnerable group who are self-isolation in the periphery. We have had more anxiety or irritation or complaints about self-isolation than wanting to be self-isolated. So interestingly, liver cirrhosis decompensated patients have got excess risk of actually death from any infection, but even more so clearly COVID-19. So we recommended the government that they're the top group to be in self-isolation groups, and government did not follow our advice, which meant that we had to do it individually, locally. The the disadvantage of not isolating was that they were not really entitled for the social care and help they were going to provide. So, but to be frank, actually, we had more contacts about why I have to really self-isolate, because it has also its hazards. You get lonely, you lose touch, you can't be active. So it is a double-edged sword. That is what I would really highlight. And what do? I would say at the moment, our guidance for my patients is to individualize. So if you are my patient, I'm very happy to talk to each one of you and then put the pros and cons, tell you medical information as well, and then give an advice. That's what I would rather do.
Thank you. That's very insightful. There's actually another question that's kind of directly related to that, so I'll lead on with that one next. So it's basically asking, given the data, the outcomes you've just shared with us from the Panther study, and it seems that healthcare workers from only the Black community may have more antibodies and exposure because of where they work. Why do you think that in the community then it stayed the same exposure? Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, I think it's a balance. I hope I understand it. So you're saying why so Black ethnic minority group are more at getting an infection when they're healthcare workers. Why is it also that they are at risk to get the infection in the community? Is that how I understand
it?
Yeah, I mean, I would say exactly the same answer. I showed you that geography, demography did show excess risk in the almost all the ethnic minority to a varying degree in the one of the first few slides showed. And in addition, in Black Caribbean minority, you could see that highest amount of excess risk unexplained by any of these factors, which will bring back to me saying, well, some of the factors which we haven't really accounted for is actually innate ability of them responding to the infection, which comes to me as a biological difference, genetic differences. So I wouldn't say it's bigger than these, but they certainly are there. That is the point I want to make. And this is directly inferred from the data that I have shown you, not my own kind of an impression, not that I fancy doing some research on it.
I was going to say you are a researcher, so it's all evidence-based. Okay, I'll move on to the next question now. So, is there a reason to assume that response to vaccines will be modified by genetic makeup?
Yeah, this is exactly why we need ethnic minorities participate in the trials. You see, we want to know if they are more likely to get infection. In our study, I just want to stress that there are the interpretation of my study should be in the context I described. So these are specific group of people. So going back to the point is that absolutely yes, it can be different, and that's why we want really people to participate. That's why I put up our Indian Queen's picture.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And following on from that as well, do you think the trials are big enough to tease this out at this stage?
I don't think so. You're talking about vaccine trials. No. I mean, vaccine trial, proof of the pudding eventually is not antibody response, which we are measuring. Proof of the pudding is, will you be protected by infection and how long you are protected. So you need a huge number of people who are infected and having identified for us to compare the differences. So at the moment, no, I don't think there are enough people. But what that people are testing at the moment is safety mainly. Effectiveness or I would say efficacy comes next. And then you will have what we call an effectiveness. So efficacy means that within the group of people we have been able to enroll, how many are protected. And then effectiveness is like, if you throw it as a available to everybody, how effective it will be. That depends upon how many take it up, how many participate, how many present. So that is even much bigger trial. That is what is needed. Yeah.
Okay, really interesting, thank you. Well, the next question flows on from that one as well, actually. So someone's asked, do you think that there's enough diversity in the participants that are taking part in current vaccine trials?
Sadly not, sadly not. I don't really, I mean, I don't know the data, but I've been told, I've read, for example, in the US, there are papers being published inviting almost like a black university to take leadership in promoting. And to be honest, that sounds like a little bit of somebody creating this variation and then asking people who are put marginalized to take responsibility to sort it out. So so I do know that there is a problem.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think there are some perceptions from all different communities about vaccine trials. So I mean,
yeah, I think there is a big anti-vaccine groups, powerful ones, and sadly there is so much of unscientific data get mixed up with scientific caution with it. I know more details, so people can talk to me in detail about it. I can highlight a few people who are leading these kind of campaigns and their backgrounds and where they come from. I don't want to kind of spend 10 minutes explaining it.
That's fine. Thank you. Thank you.
And they have nothing to do with the ethnicity at all, actually. They have got all of personal agendas.
Very interesting. So I think we've actually come to the end of the questions in the chat. So unless anyone else has anything else that they would like to add at this moment in time, I'm just doing another check, and I'll look at the chat. No, and no one's got any raised hands. Well, we will leave it there then.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for that really, really insightful talk. So this session has been recorded. And with your permission, Guru, we'll send it to the attendees. And of course, we will send out the next invitation for the next virtual lounge, which will actually link into this one. We're hoping to hold it on diversity and inclusivity in research more generally.
Thank you.
So I just want to thank everyone again. Oh, sorry, I've had one more question in the chat. Sorry, Guru. Have you got a moment to take it before we go?
Yeah, sure.
Do you think there is a difference in the rate and speed of infection in BAME colleagues living in Africa and those who are living in Western areas? Interesting one.
At the moment, there is no huge amount of data coming from Africa as far as I can see and compare. I was part of a speakers group where one of the Africa-Caribbean background speakers from US gave a talk on HLA variations between different geographical regions. So I do have I do have a reason to believe that it will be a little bit different because other factors do matter, and probably in terms of proportion might matter more than just the ethnic background or a genetic susceptibility. So answer to Aquilin is yes, other factors do matter, and other factors might matter more. The point I was trying to make is that other factors don't explain everything. That's all. Thank you.
Very interesting. Yeah. Perfect. That answered the questions. Okay, then. So, I mean, if anyone does have any further questions, then please do email us. I'm going to pop a final slide up at the end that's got our contact information on it. So if you do want to ask any questions that come to you once you've left the session, then please do email them in, and we're more than happy to answer those for you. But I just want to thank you again, Guru, for your time today. It's greatly appreciated, and thank you everyone for attending, and we'll be in touch about the next virtual lounge. So thank you very much, and we'll see you soon.